when the Galactic Union, a coalition of highly advanced alien civilizations, first learned of Earth's admission as a probationary member, they found the notion laughable. Here was a tiny, primitive world from a corner of the galaxy with barely any interstellar travel, no psionic abilities, and hardly a shred of advanced technology. And yet, there was one aspect that fascinated the Union more than anything. The creatures humans called pets. Reports from observation units stated that humans bonded deeply with these animals, which showed loyalty, affection, and strange traits that seemed to suggest a heightened intelligence. This sparked curiosity, and soon, a proposal was accepted by the Union's Council of Study: acquire a human's pet and conduct rigorous research to understand what made it so valued by its human companion. It was deemed a simple enough assignment, given the Union's technological prowess. Drakra, a senior scientist from the Arteal, a species known for their clinical precision and obsession with order, was chosen to lead the study. Drakra saw the assignment as an insult, an absolute waste of his skills, but the prestige of completing a Union-mandated project and the promise of funding for his own research proved too enticing. Their target arrived quickly, a human trader named Caleb Marshall, who worked between the asteroid colonies near Jupiter. The humans had initially objected, but with some well-placed political pressure, they'd agreed to allow Drakra's team access to one of Caleb's pets for non-invasive research. The human under Union escort arrived at the research station with a small, black-furred creature named Duke. It was some Earth species called a dog. Caleb held the leash, giving stern instructions to both the creature and the scientists around him. Drakra watched in faint amusement as the human knelt down, looking at the dog with such intensity it was almost endearing. "All right, Duke, listen up. I'll be right outside, okay? These guys are just going to take a look at you for a little while. And then we're out of here," Caleb said in a low voice, as though the creature could understand him. Drakra clicked his mandibles in impatience, his multifaceted eyes scanning Caleb's pet. He could see nothing special about the creature. It was small, it moved awkwardly on 4 legs, and it had blunt teeth. In his opinion, it was a waste of resources. But protocol was protocol. Caleb eyed Drakra as he reluctantly handed over the leash, a strange mixture of worry and warning in his gaze. "Duke's trained to be pretty calm, but if you hurt him, even by accident, I'll be back in here faster than you can blink." Drakra offered a thin, mirthless smile. "The Union is dedicated to humane research, Mr. Marshall. You have my word that your Duke will be unharmed." Caleb shot a last look at Duke, whispered something reassuring, then stepped back, letting the research team lead the creature into the main lab. Duke was placed in the center of the sterile lab, a vast chamber lined with translucent screens and control panels that pulsed with faint, fluorescent lights. Drakra, accompanied by 3 of his fellow scientists, Arkan, Moshi, and Vril, hovered around the observation consoles, making notes as various sensors scanned Duke. The first observation began with standard body scans, monitoring Duke's vital signs, neural patterns, and muscle composition. But as soon as the scanner activated, Duke seemed to grow uneasy. His eyes darted around, and he let out a low growl, staring directly at Drakra with unnerving intensity. "Interesting," Drakra murmured, noting the dog's reaction. "It appears to possess a defensive response to unfamiliar technology." Moshi, a tentacled researcher with expertise in bioresponses, shook her tendrils in agreement. "Perhaps it senses some kind of threat from the scanner." Vril laughed, a shrill, buzzing sound. "Ridiculous. It's just a base creature. Besides, look at it, no claws, no offensive features. This will be the easiest assignment we've ever completed." Arkan nodded, joining in the laughter. "Indeed. If this is what humans call dangerous, I wonder how they have survived at all." They activated a secondary scan, this one targeting Duke's neural pathways. However, as soon as the machine hummed to life, Duke's body tensed. He bared his teeth, and the low growl escalated into a bark that echoed through the lab. Drakra raised one arm to silence the others, intrigued. "Curious, this behavior suggests a protective response. Increase scan frequency by 10%, Moshi." As the machine amplified its output, Duke's growl intensified. His eyes, previously calm, now glinted with something that could only be described as defiance. The temperature monitors on Duke's body showed a significant spike, an unusual response for a creature under simple observation. "Is it heating up?" Arkin asked, perplexed. Animals of this type should not have such temperature variability under passive observation. "Perhaps it's defective," Vril offered dismissively. A lesser creature could be easily overwhelmed by unfamiliar surroundings. But as they increased the scan, Duke suddenly lunged. With astonishing agility, he broke free of the monitoring restraints, his movements swift and fluid. The scientist recoiled as Duke charged toward one of the scanners, teeth bared. Vril laughed, ready to dismiss the behavior as a minor inconvenience. But then Duke leaped up, grabbing hold of a diagnostic cable in his teeth and yanking it free with a snarl. The console sparked and crackled, plunging part of the lab into darkness. The dog backed up, growling more fiercely as the aliens stared, stunned. "Contain it," Drakra shouted, his voice losing its customary calm. He activated the containment barrier, a shimmering force field that blinked into place around Duke. But Duke barely paused. With a burst of energy, he lunged at the barrier, jaws snapping as his teeth connected with the energy field. The containment barrier, designed to repel much larger and more powerful beings, fluctuated wildly, its light sparking and flickering as Duke's snarl grew louder. "No," she exclaimed, her tentacles tightening in alarm. "That field is calibrated for high resistance. How is it failing against such a small creature?" Duke's eyes blazed as he continued attacking the barrier with relentless focus, his muscles straining with an unexpected strength. The force field wavered, then flickered and dropped. Drakra felt a pang of something he hadn't experienced in decades' fear. This was not just a pet, this was something dangerous, something that defied all expectations. Duke's teeth bared as he locked eyes with Drakra, as though he understood exactly who had brought him into this lab. Arkin stumbled back, bumping into the control panel, sending various pieces of equipment clattering to the floor. It's impossible. No creature of that size should be capable of overriding containment. Duke took advantage of their shock and leapt onto the nearest console, his paws smashing through circuits and panels. Sparks flew as the lab's temperature regulators shut down, causing steam to pour from the vents. Duke, unfazed, darted to the next piece of equipment, ripping through wiring and controls with a precision that was unnervingly systematic. "This creature, it's dismantling our systems," Moshi stammered, unable to process the reality before her. The entire lab was plunged into chaos. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and Duke was now a blur of motion, tearing through equipment with ruthless efficiency. Drakra shouted commands, but every order seemed useless. Vril attempted to activate the emergency lockdown, only to find the panel destroyed seconds before he reached it. "Initiate the lab evacuation protocol," Drakra commanded, panic creeping into his voice. But before they could even reach the exit, Duke turned his attention to the scientists. His once friendly eyes now glowed with an almost predatory focus, as if he recognized each of them as a target. "No," Drakra whispered, backing away. "This is not a mere animal." Duke charged, a force of nature compressed into a creature barely 3 feet tall. He tackled Vril, sending him sprawling across the lab floor. The scientist scrambled, trying to shield himself with his arms, but Duke was relentless, barking and snapping with a ferocity that had every alien in the room stumbling backward. Drakra, desperate, pressed a hidden button on his wrist, activating a coded distress signal to the Union's Central Command. They had vastly underestimated the power and loyalty of this pet. And now, as Duke systematically dismantled the lab, Drakra realized that they might not make it out unscathed. Just then, the reinforced doors to the lab burst open, and Caleb rushed in, a look of fury mixed with relief on his face. "Duke." The dog's ears perked up at the sound of his human's voice, and his stance shifted from attack mode to a relaxed trot. He bounded over to Caleb, tail wagging as though he hadn't just dismantled an entire laboratory. Caleb glared at Drakra, who was still cowering behind an overturned console. "You had one job, observe. But I get one whiff of Duke's distress, and I find him tearing through your lab. What the hell were you trying to do to him?" Drakra could barely compose himself, his mandibles clicking nervously. The experiment went awry. This creature, it defied all logic. We didn't know it possessed such capabilities. Capabilities, Caleb laughed sharply. Duke's not just a pet. He's trained for security work, rescue ops, defense drills. He's the best partner I've ever had. And you thought you could just stick him in some cage and poke at him. Drakra tried to stand, brushing off the sparks and fragments of destroyed equipment. We did not know that your creatures held such power. This dog has far exceeded any documented capability. Caleb shook his head. Maybe next time you'll think twice before underestimating what humans hold close. He gave Duke a scratch behind the ears, earning an enthusiastic wag of the tail. Come on, boy. We're going home. As they left, Drakra could only watch, his pride crumbling beneath a cold realization they had considered humans weak, their bonds with their animals insignificant, even foolish. But this dog, this Duke, had proven otherwise, showing them the sheer force of loyalty and protective instinct in a single destructive hour. When the lab's emergency crews arrived, they found the Union's best scientists shaken, surrounded by broken consoles and shattered pride. Drakra would submit his report later, detailing his findings with newfound caution and respect. But he knew that the Union would think twice before ever trying to study a human's pet again. The silence that settled over the lab after Caleb and Duke's departure was as heavy as the damage they'd left behind. Consoles lay smashed and sparking, vital monitors cracked, and the Union's brightest minds sat stunned amidst the ruins of their failed experiment. Drakra looked around at the devastation with a mixture of disbelief and resentment, his reputation tarnished in a way that no report could ever fully explain away. Arkan, dusting himself off with a tentacle-like limb, broke the silence. What exactly was that creature? He gazed at Drakra, his compound eyes reflecting a fear that Drakra had never seen in his normally stoic colleague. Drakra shook his head, his mandibles clicking in frustration. It is what they call a dog, he said, the words sounding strange in his alien dialect. But clearly there is more to it than we knew. These creatures are bred not just for companionship. They embody some primal force, loyalty, aggression, cunning. He trailed off, unwilling to acknowledge the strange, unquantifiable qualities he had witnessed in Duke. Moshi had managed to pick herself up from where she'd fallen, her tendrils trembling slightly. These pets are not merely passive creatures. They possess some kind of intelligence. I've seen predator species, but none like this. It seemed almost protective. Vril, whose ego had taken as much damage as the lab itself, sneered. A pet that takes down a fully shielded lab? Ridiculous. This is more than loyalty. That creature was trained to see us as the enemy. That's not an animal, it's a weapon. Drakra's gaze darkened as he considered Vril's words. As much as he loathed to admit it, there was a grain of truth there. Duke was more than a mere animal, more than even a companion. It was as though he was a warrior, one capable of untold destruction when something he loved was threatened. Enough. Drakra's voice cut through the others. He steadied himself, summoning whatever shred of authority he had left. The Union will hear of this, but we will approach it with restraint. We do not need them to know that a human's pet outsmarted our systems. Arkan, looking doubtful, nodded. But how can we report this incident? The Council will want to know the full details. They won't be pleased with our setbacks. Drakra pondered this, his pride still wounded but his instincts as a scientist kicking in. He had seen enough to understand that humanity's so-called primitive world held unexpected, dangerous depths. He could only imagine what the Council's reaction might be if they learned the truth of what had happened here. We'll omit certain details, Drakra decided, gesturing toward the broken equipment. We'll report that the subject exhibited unanticipated responses to stimuli, causing our containment field to fail. We need not mention how utterly the containment was breached, but we will advise the Council that, in future dealings, Earth's creatures are to be approached with caution. Drakra filed the report with careful edits and omissions, a vague outline of events meant to preserve as much dignity as possible while cautioning the Council against further study of Earth's pets. But the memory of Duke lingered, haunting him as he replayed each vivid moment of the dog's defiance. He hoped that his cautionary report would end the Union's curiosity about Earth's peculiar animals. He was wrong. Months passed. The incident became a subject of whispers, but with Drakra's carefully crafted report, no official investigation into Earth's pets was ordered. However, word of Duke's actions reached members of the council, piquing interest in the strangest way. When the report landed on the desk of council leader Norris, a dignified and rather arrogant counselor from the Raylan species, he was unimpressed by the note of caution. Norris believed that his reputation for efficiency and direct action would be enough to counter the pitiful failures of a scientist like Drakra. And so, despite the warnings, Norris arranged for a second mission to Earth. This time he ordered the quiet acquisition of several trained dogs to be tested in a controlled environment on a secure Union research base, far from human observation. The mission went smoothly. The team returned with 6 specimens: 2 German Shepherds, a Rottweiler, a Golden Retriever, and 2 small terrier breeds, selected for their reputation as companion animals. None of the humans objected, assuming they had merely been selected for observation and soon would be returned. Norris himself arrived on the base, convinced that his containment field enhancements would prevent any repeat of Drakra's catastrophe. His protocols were rigorous, his containment fields layered and over-engineered. This time, there would be no destruction, no unforeseen rebellion. Or so he thought. Norris gave his scientists specific orders to observe only. They were forbidden to engage in any invasive tests. But when a Rottweiler named Bear began barking furiously, scratching and throwing himself against the walls of the containment room, Norris's control slipped. The dog was straining against its bonds, foaming with fury, its eyes locked on the closest scientists, who backed up instinctively. "Deactivate soundproofing," Norris ordered sharply. "I want to understand what causes such reactions." One of the scientists deactivated the soundproofing, and in an instant, the other dogs perked up, hearing Bear's growls and responding in kind. The shepherds, retrievers, and even the small terriers seemed to align in a strange, symbiotic way, pacing in agitation, focusing their collective gaze on the containment wall that separated them from their observers. "Restrain them," Norris snapped, watching the dogs with growing unease as they glared at him through the glass. But the more they activated restraints and containment fields, the more the dogs seemed to resist, fighting against every measure with escalating strength. Even the smallest terrier struggled with surprising intensity, its high-pitched barks echoing through the lab. One by one, the containment fields began to flicker. The dog's barking was setting off frequencies that were interfering with the lab's systems, causing power fluctuations that no one had foreseen. The scientists scrambled to recalibrate, but the more they tried to dampen the sound, the more intense the barking grew, as though the dogs were amplifying each other's calls. Norris's confidence faltered as the equipment began to overheat. Sparks flew from the panels, filling the air with acrid smoke. The Rottweiler snarled, lunging forward with a powerful twist that snapped its restraints, and as it did, the others followed suit. Each dog moved as if on some unspoken command, targeting consoles, cables, and containment controls with pinpoint precision. Bear launched himself at the control panel, his massive jaws clamping down on the wiring. His growls became a guttural roar as he shredded through the machinery, sending waves of sparks cascading through the lab. The terriers scrambled over the floor, pulling at exposed wires and tearing through connections. The Golden Retriever, with a surprising burst of strength, rammed its weight against a mainframe, causing it to crash to the ground. Panic gripped the lab. Norris's voice rang out, commanding the scientists to hold their positions, but as the dogs spread out, each displaying the same single-minded destruction as Duke months before, it became clear that containment was impossible. "Activate emergency lockdown," Norris shouted, but no one could respond. The control systems had failed, the emergency protocols overridden by the devastation the dogs had unleashed. In a last, desperate attempt to salvage control, Norris turned to flee, but Bear was already there, blocking his path. The dog stood firm, its deep growl vibrating with a low menace as it stared him down, eyes flashing with a primal ferocity. Norris stumbled back, finally understanding that this was no coincidence, no freak occurrence of rogue animals. These dogs, like Duke, were acting out of something deeper, something that had been nurtured in their bonds with humans. They weren't just defending themselves, they were showing allegiance to a cause. He had seen this trait only in Union soldiers, bound by years of training and discipline. But here it was, instinctual, fierce, and unbreakable. Bear lunged at him, teeth bared, forcing him back into the center of the lab, and one by one, the other dogs joined, circling him like a pack. In a flash of insight, Norris knew what Drakra had feared to admit these animals. These pets were not just creatures. They were soldiers of a different breed, bound by an unspoken loyalty and instinct to protect, one that had been forged over centuries alongside their human companions. The sounds of containment fields failing, equipment sparking, and the relentless barks and growls of the dogs reached a fever pitch as Norris's world fell into chaos. When Union forces arrived, drawn by the frantic distress signal, they found the lab in ruins, consoles torn apart, containment cells shattered, and every single scientist either cowering in terror or rendered unconscious. Norris was found slumped against a wall, dazed and muttering about the force of human loyalty. The dogs were unharmed, calmly sitting by the lab's entrance, waiting for their rescue. When human emissaries arrived to collect them, each dog greeted their handlers with tail wags and joyful barks, as though nothing unusual had transpired. The Union, humiliated and shaken, withdrew all future experiments involving Earth's pets. Official reports were vague, omitting many details and leaving only warnings about Earth species. In private, however, a rumor began to circulate through the ranks human pets were dangerous, not because of their strength, but because of their bonds and unbreakable loyalty that defied even the most advanced containment. Back on Earth, Caleb heard the news with a smirk. His Duke was safe and sound, by his side as always, and now he knew that the galaxy had learned a hard lesson: to underestimate Earth's pets was to court disaster. And as for Duke, Bear, and the others, they lived on as quiet, loyal companions, content in their roles as humanity's guardians, a force the galaxy would never dare challenge again.